Glad you're here. Let's jump right in. If you'll take your Bibles, open them to the book of Luke, chapter 7. We're in a series that we've been talking about parables. The main form that Jesus teaches his messages about the kingdom is in the form of parables. Parables are just earthly stories with spiritual meanings or heavenly meanings. And so it's a unique form of teaching that it takes a little bit of hunting and pecking, a little bit of study, a little bit of looking closely at what he's actually saying to pull and to grab some of those truths. And so I want to give you a little one today. This is a great one. In fact, probably one of my more favorite ones. This comes from chapter 7. It's a small parable. I just want to read this to you, and then we'll kind of look at the context together. It says, Jesus says, two people owed money to a certain money lender. One owed him 500 denarii, and the other 50. A denarii is kind of like a day's wages in the Roman world, so Roman coin for a day's wages. So basically like almost 2 years worth of debt and about a quarter of a year worth of debt. And so neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more is the parable. Pretty good, right? So I want to take a look at the context of that. I just wanted to give you the parable, and there's this thing that's going on where Jesus gives this parable that I think makes the parable unique. And so I'm reading to you today from Luke chapter 7. This is a longer run. I'm not going to put this on the screen for you, so if you just want to listen along, you can, or if you want to follow along, you can. I'm going to start in verse 36. It says, when one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. And just so we can kind of create the right mental picture, the reclining at the table is an important piece, because in this section of the world at this time, you would come in, you kind of recline on one shoulder, the tables were low. A meal was like a long gathering. They didn't have things they were off to. They didn't have social media. They didn't have to catch a TV show like Survivor wasn't doing their end of the year series. It was like they just kind of sat and they just enjoyed the night together and they reclined together, and it was a much more relaxed experience than some of our formal experiences. Verse 37, a woman in that town who lived a sinful life. I guess you can probably put the pieces there together for that. Learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume, which would have been a very expensive item, this perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured the perfume on them. You can imagine if you got a room full of guys, and this is usually a male-dominated culture, and you got a room full of guys, they're sitting around at this table and they're reclining. That means their feet are exposed. And in a time where open-toed sandals is kind of the normal footwear, and you're walking around all day in some dusty areas, the idea of gathering for a meal included the concept customarily that you were going to have your feet cleaned before that took place, because it was just gross. Are you with me? I mean, it's not a lot more to it than just like, I don't want to look at your stank feet while we eat. That got skipped at this meal with this Pharisee who should have known better. That got skipped. It wasn't legal. It was just customary, but it got skipped. And here comes this woman, and she is wetting his feet with her tears and wiping them with her hair and cleaning them with the perfume, which would have been part of the customary activities. Verse 39. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. And he's making note of the fact that her reputation in this community is that she's a sexual sinner. Verse 40, Jesus answered him and said, Simon, I have something to tell you. Tell me, teacher, he said. And then comes the parable. Two people owed money to a certain money lender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other owed him 50, and neither of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of them will love him more? Simon the Pharisee replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven. Jesus says, you have judged correctly. pretty good. All right, let's take a little moment and take a look at some of this stuff. I think the first thing that goes wrong, and I've heard this explained so many times the wrong way. I mean, if there's a parable that gets miscommunicated, gets mistranslated, gets read or misunderstood, it's this one. It's kind of a weird one. But usually it starts off with this concept, right? That people look at this parable and they go, well, what Jesus is really saying in there's a little sinner here in this story, and there's a big sinner here in this story, and they put forth, that starts the interpretation. Like, hey, we got a big sinner, we got a little sinner, we got this woman who, for all intents and purposes, most commentators would tell you is a prostitute. We've got this prostitute, big sinner. We got this religious guy, little sinner. And Jesus is trying to help him understand some things about the big sinner and the little sinner. And that's kind of the road we start to go down. I hear sermons on this thing all the time. I listen to, I guess when you're that's part of the occupational hazard. I listen to a lot of other sermons. They usually get titled like this: the preacher and the prostitute, or the Pharisee and the floozy, and I could keep going. There's a lot of them that kind of come with this concept around this little story. But it's missing the point. And I want you to see this. Let's go through some of the mistakes first that takes place. And this is going to get slightly complicated. I need you to stay with me for 5 minutes as I lay this case out. But this is slightly complicated. But the missing the point first is that the big sinners are better off. I get people who look at this passage. I've sat in small groups, and gathered with people, and listened to people talk about this passage. And they look at this and they say, see, this woman who's this really big sinner, what Jesus is really trying to say is she's technically better off. Right? She's a bad sinner, right? But that's made her really, really ready for the whole Jesus thing. So technically, we should be bad sinners, right? In fact, I get people all the time that interpret the gospel this way, that hear grace through that lens. That literally when either I'm speaking or another person is sharing the gospel and including the message of grace that's laced throughout the gospel, they go, wait a minute, are you saying that sin's a good thing, right? It almost sounds like you're saying sin's a good thing. And that would definitely be a misinterpretation of what's taking place in this passage. Jesus is not saying, yes, let's get down with some sin, right? So that you can get a better shot at me. That's not what he's saying. But that tends to be one of the interpretations. Let me give you an illustration of how I think this is so clear from the life of Paul. The second half of the book of Acts is dedicated to the most significant figure in the New Testament besides Jesus, who is Paul, the Apostle Paul, who becomes a church planter as he does all these missionary journeys around the then Roman world. Acts records him going from city to city to city, doing the same thing, walking into the city, going to the synagogue, discussing with the religious leaders the gospel, clearly articulating it to them, starting a home church and leaving that home church with new leadership as he goes to the next town. These are the towns in which he travels to. This is how the book of Acts outlines this: Damascus and Jerusalem and Antioch and Iconium and on and on. He just goes town to town to town to town to town. If you read through the second half of the book of Acts, starting in chapter 9, it's just literally his travels through this community, planting churches along the way. And the same thing happens in every single community that he goes to. It's the same problem. It's the misinterpretation of this passage that we're reading today, and it is a great illustration in how we get off track with the gospel message. Look at this, starting in Damascus. It says, Saul, this is back when he's Saul, you got the whole deal. Saul stayed with the believers in Damascus, and immediately he began preaching about Jesus in the synagogues. And after a while, some of the Jews plotted to kill him. Boom. Now, this is the same format in every single town. He shows up, goes to the synagogue, discusses the gospel, and they're like, you know what? Let's kill you. I kid you not. Check it out. He goes from Damascus to Jerusalem. It says, Paul stayed with the apostles and went all around Jerusalem, preaching boldly in the name of the Lord. He debated with some of the Greek-speaking Jews, but they tried to murder him. This guy's nailing it. I mean, it's got to be discouraging that every time you give a talk, they're like, let's kill him, right? Not even hey, that wasn't that good. Not booze, not even stuff thrown. Just let's kill this dude. All right, he goes from there to Antioch, chapter 13. Then the Jews stirred up the influential religious women. That's a good bunch right there. And the leaders of the city. And they enticed a mob against Paul and Barnabas and ran them out of town. Now he's with one of his companions on this journey. And Barnabas has got to be like, dude, these people do not like you, right? Iconium, chapter 14. Then the mob of Gentiles and Jews, along with their leaders, decided to attack and stone them. Or how about this? Next slide, Lystra. Then some Jews arrived from Antioch and Iconium. Now, get this. They chased him from the last two towns. So at the last two towns, they collected a mob, and then they chased him to Lystra. Seriously. And won the crowds to their side. They stoned Paul. They actually did get to chuck stones at him and dragged him out of town thinking he was dead. They're like, we nailed it. Literally, no pun intended, nailed him, right? Check this out, next slide. Philippi, Acts chapter 16. A mob quickly formed against Paul and Silas, and the city officials ordered them stripped and beaten with wooden rod, always a good time. They were severely beaten, and then they were thrown into prison. This guy has been run out of town, plotted against, stoned, beaten, and he's doing the same thing in every town. Let me tell you about Christ and the grace provided through the gospel. That's literally what he's doing. Next slide, check it out. Chapter 17 is in Thessalonica. As it was Paul's custom, he went to the synagogue service. Surprise, surprise, he does that in every town. But some of the Jews were jealous, so they gathered some troublemakers from the marketplace. I don't know who that group is. Who's the troublemaker? You guys probably have troublemakers in your life, right? They went down there like, who would be good at this? They grabbed those guys from the marketplace and formed a mob and started a riot. They're like, we got to deal with this. Or how about this? Next slide. Look. He goes from there to Athens, then to Corinth, then to Ephesus. Every single town, he goes to the synagogue, gives the gospel message, talks about the benefit of grace provided through Christ, and they're like, we should kill him. And you should be asking at this point, why? Why are they so mad? What's going on? Like that, think about it. We get that message all the time. What's so controversial about the idea of Christ? Why are they so angry in every single one of these towns? When he arrives in Jerusalem, we get that answer in chapter 21. Listen to the words. Jews saw Paul in the temple and roused a mob against him. They grabbed him yelling, "Men of Israel, help us. This is the man who preaches against our people everywhere and tells everybody to disobey the Jewish law." The reason they're so mad, the reason they try to kill him in every single town he goes into is because of what he's saying. Because at the very foundation of what he's saying is the gospel includes you cannot get to God by your morality. You cannot get to God by your behavior. You cannot get to God through the law. And every single one of these communities and every single one of these synagogues is built on the idea that if you are law obedient, you are good. Here's the crazy part too. Every single world religion is built on that idea. If you're good, God will bless you. And here comes Paul and he's saying, I got a new message for you. I've met the risen Christ on the road to Damascus, and what he's told me is this: you cannot get to God through being good. We're not good enough. You can only get to God through the grace provided from Christ on the cross. That's it. And they want to kill him in every single town. And you say, okay, so let me give you an example how that looks like. Take just the Roman church and what Paul says to the Roman church. Look at this. In chapter 3, he words it this way: no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by the works of the law. Rather, through the law, we become, and listen to this, aware of sin. And you're like, that doesn't seem that controversial. But if you're a Jew, if you're religious, if you've been telling your kids and your grandkids and everybody that you've ever met, the whole system is built upon the idea that if you obey, you will be good. This is a cataclysmic change to that message. Now you've got a guy saying, no, it's not if you obey, you will be good. It's if you break the law, you'll be aware of how much you need God, which is different. Things are shifting and changing. By the time we get to chapter 6, as Paul writes to the Romans church, he says this. Next slide. What shall we say then? Shall we go on sinning that grace may increase? Now think about what's happening here. Paul's asking a question, but it's a rhetorical question. He's not asking the question because he's proposing the question. He's saying, every town I've ever gone to, when I tell them the gospel, you know what they ask me? Are you saying that we should just sin then? That grace would increase? Are you saying sin's a good thing? Is that what you're saying, Paul? He gets that question in every single town, everywhere he shows up, every time he teaches the gospel. And so when we get to Rome, the Roman church, he asks the question as if to say, now that I've laid this gospel out to you, let me ask the question I know you're thinking, which is, are you saying, Paul, that we should just sin so that grace would increase, that sin leads to good grace? Think about this. He's already laid this case out to the Roman church. Look at what he says in chapter 4. This is heavy. Chapter 4 of the book of Romans to the Roman church, he says, well then, should we conclude that we Jews are better than others, Gentiles? No, not at all, he says. For we have already shown that all people, whether Jew or Gentile, are under the power of sin. So think about this. He's told a bunch of Jews who fill up synagogues every day, telling themselves if they obey the law, that they're better than everybody else. He's already told them, you're no better. You're no good. You're the same. Look at this. No, not at all. There's no difference, Paul. There's no difference between us moral Jews, us religious people, than the rest of the world. All these Gentile pagans worshiping their polytheistic gods. Is that what you're telling me? Yes. And he drives it home big time. Chapter 1, listen as he describes the pagan world. They have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, depravity. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They're gossipers, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, boastful. They invent ways of doing evil, and they disobey their parents. Throw that in there. Boom. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, and no mercy. And then, that's chapter 1, and then we get to chapter 4, and he goes, and the Jews are no better. What? And you're like, well, no wonder they wanted to kill him at every town. He's telling Jews in Jewish synagogues that they're not morally better than the Gentiles. And they're like, get the stones. Get the stones. So get this. He's saying people are sinners, chapter 1. The world's full of sinners. He's saying religious people are sinners, chapter 2 through 4. That's the Jews. And he's saying sin prompts us of our need for a Savior. It prompts us to our need for a Savior. That's chapter 6. And so his message is the world's full of sinners. Religious people are sinners too. And sin and the knowledge of our sin prompts us for a need for a Savior. It is a different message. You say, why is that so different? Because up until this point in time, the message was do good and be blessed by God. And Paul's message was, you can't do anything good enough in your own power. Anything. God's blessing comes through grace. It comes by his volition and not by yours. It comes by his hand and not by your work. And you're like, wow, okay. That's why they're mad in every single town. That's it. Back to our story. Think about this. When this woman shows up, she walks in, all these guys sitting around this table, they're having dinner, they're drinking wine. Think about what's happened here, right? You've got this host, this religious host, who's not given Jesus the customary blessing of preparing him for the meal or preparing the guests for the meal. He hasn't washed their feet. And now you've got a woman who's known in the town as a prostitute, who enters in uninvited. And think this through. I don't think she showed up knowing what was going to happen. I don't think she showed up believing that she was going to be that emotional. I think that's why the hair thing's in there. I think when she gets there and she's heard that there's a rabbi in town who think about it, Jesus' reputation is that he eats with tax collectors and prostitutes. That's his reputation. And so when she shows up, she's thinking, that's me. That's my category, right? So she shows up, but I think in the moment, she's overwhelmed with emotion. And so she doesn't bring a towel to wipe his feet. She ends up wiping the feet with her hair. Why? I don't think she knew she was going to be crying that hard. I think she's overwhelmed in the moment with this emotional response in the presence of Jesus. The symbolism, the metaphor here between this prostitute and this religious guy couldn't be more clear, right? And Jesus is looking at, he doesn't even see her. Jesus is looking at this whole situation. He's watching this woman wash his feet. It is powerful outpouring. And then he gives this illustration where he says, hey, I got this story to tell you. I have this story I want to tell you. I think the second thing that the people misinterpret this passage about is they say, well, moral people are better off. So they think about Jesus' words. Jesus says to the man, he says, there's one guy with 500 denarii of debt, $500 of debt, right? And there's this other guy with $50 of debt. And I think the misinterpretation there is that you could look at that and say, well, Jesus is concluding, or he's conceding the idea that this guy's more moral. But ask yourself that question. Do you actually believe that Jesus believes that this guy's more moral? So obviously something's going on there. What's going on in this passage? Does Jesus actually believe this guy is better? Because from the simple words, you could conclude that he's better off, but we know that can't be it. Think about what James chapter 2 says, that if you break even one of the laws, you're guilty of the requirement of the whole law, which means no matter what the debt, at the end of the day, and I know this is heavy, ready? Their debt load is the same. And he knows this. And the religious official should know this. Look at James chapter 2. The religious official should know that, right? So what's going on? What's happening in this passage, right? Let me show you where I think the key is. Next slide, check this out. Listen to these words, because this is the key that I think opens the door to this particular parable. The Pharisee who had invited him saw this, listen to this, this woman washing the feet of Jesus, and then he said to himself, this is the part we miss. This is the part that you look over, and if you don't get this, you'll mess this whole parable up. You won't understand it. Listen to what's happening. He invited him. He saw this woman doing this, and he said to himself. He didn't say out loud. He said to himself. He thought to himself. Are you with me? Look at this. If this man were a prophet, he would know that this woman touching him, what kind of woman she was, that she's a sinner. And Jesus answered him. And Jesus answered what? Well, he answered his thoughts. Are you with me? He thought to himself, which is an interesting little thing there, right? So Jesus like, hey, if you were a prophet, and Jesus like, boom, let me tell you what you're thinking, which is kind of cool. Side note, we'll do that another day. That was a good one right there. Just throw that in for free. But that's pretty good, right? He's like, hey, he was thinking to himself, if Jesus knew what this woman I've done the previous night, no way he lets her touch him. That's insane in this moral religious culture. To which Jesus says, I do know what you're thinking. Let me tell you a story based on, and get this, what he's thinking. Based on what he's thinking. Jesus is not addressing what he's saying. He's not addressing reality. He's addressing his worldview. He's addressing the way he thinks. And that changes everything in this little passage. So when Jesus says, hey, there's two guys, they have this debt, he's not saying that the woman has a greater debt than the man. He's saying, you think she has a greater debt than you. Are you with me? That changes everything in this particular little passage. Look at this. The religious guy is a little sinner and the woman is a big sinner. Jesus is not saying that. He's not saying, he's conceding a point to prove a point. He's not saying that this man has a less of a debt threshold, less of a sinner threshold than this woman. That's not what he's saying. He's saying, you think she has less debt than, or more debt than you. You think that you're more moral than she is. You think you're better off than she is. That's what he's saying. Or how about this? Jesus is saying there are some people who, listen to this, think they are better than others. Uh-oh. There are some, now think about that. That's some of us here. Ready? There are some people who think they're better than others when it comes to their behavior and how it makes them right with God. Jesus says that thought is flawed. That's what he's saying. Or Jesus is saying this. Look at this real quick. If the Pharisee realized he owed as much as the prostitute, he would cry, he would bow, and he would wash the feet too. Do you see what's happening in this passage? He's addressing this guy's thoughts. He's saying, here I am at your dinner table, and you haven't honored me. Here you are. You sit across the table from the divine, and you've given me no honor, no service, no worship, no gratitude, no thankfulness, right? And here this woman is, and she come in, and she can't stop crying. She's aware of her sinfulness, and that awareness has driven her to serve, to honor, to love, to sacrifice. And here you sit unaware of your debt, and you don't do anything. You do nothing, right? That's what's going on in this little passage. And you think, so many of the parables include this concept. I showed this to you last week. So many of the parables are addressing this issue. You're like, it's amazing how much of it is directed towards the religious and the religious mindset. Look at this next slide. Look at Luke chapter 18. Jesus told this parable to some people who trusted in themselves that they were righteous. Literally, that's like all these parables are like, hey, I'm telling you this because we got a religious group out here who thinks they've got their lives together, who are unaware of their deep need for God because they think they have made their own way. Look at this. And they view others with contempt. So they think of them, it changes the way you view not only yourself but others, meaning that you think of yourself as good by your own behavior and you think of others as less than because you've created your own categories. And then he tells this crazy story about the two men that go up to pray. And little parable, one guy prays, God, thanks I'm not like a sinner. And the other guy prays, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. Right? What's going on? Why does he keep going back to this well over and over again? And you say, well, and why sometimes here at the Vine do we go back to this well a lot? Get this, ready? Because we're tempted to constantly go back to our default settings of self-righteousness. It'll never end. You're not going to get better at this either, right? And no, I'm serious. It's kind of crazy, right? And I mean me too. I'm including me. Like, I'm on board, right? I'm in the team. I'm with you. But here's the deal. Like, I think there's a group of people who come in and they go, yeah. That's a simplistic message. That's the beginner's message. Blah 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 blah. I wish we'd move on to deeper things. And I'm like, that's definitely not the pattern you see with Jesus. The pattern you see with Jesus is, hey, we're going to go back to this again and again. Why? Because human propensity is to constantly become self-righteous, to be self-aggrandizement, self-declaration. It's to constantly take our eyes off God and put it on ourselves. That is the great temptation, right? And if there's any group that needs to hear that over and over, it's us. It's the religious group that gathers every Sunday. It's the people that are, especially you first service people, who are obviously most dedicated. the true believers. So I ask you this point. Here's the point of the parable, and I ask it to you. What do you owe God? Think about this. What if at the end of every week he gave you a bill? Like literally, he just wrote you. I mean, think about it. When it comes to indebtedness, we get a bill, right? That's what happens. You buy a car, you get a bill. You buy a house, you get a bill. You get a statement. Nobody likes those. Some of you tried to cancel your post office box. You don't want to get them anymore, right? You don't want to see it anymore. Some of us are like, some of us have dodged some of those bills, right? Some of those bills have been collected. Never mind. But you know what I'm saying? Like, nobody likes the bill, but you get a bill on all your debts. It's itemized, right? What if God handed you a bill at the end of every week or month? You know, what would that be like, right? Yeah, bankruptcy quick, right? What would that bill be like? And then think about it, how would you pay that back? How would you pay that back? What if it was like, hey, okay, let's just explore this just for a moment because we got just a second here. Think this through. What if the bill included not just the sins of commission, it included all the sins of omission? What if every time you passed on something good, that got included in your bill? Right? Not just the things you did do that you shouldn't have done. The things you didn't do that you should have done. Ugh. Glad you came to church today, aren't you? It was heavy this morning, right? But think this through. I think the misinterpretation of this passage is some people would look at it and say, well, don't you see that this woman who was this really big sinner, she found God more easily, right? Because she was this really big sinner. And maybe there's an element of truth to that, but that's not what Jesus' point is here. Remember, this whole parable is directed to the righteous person. It's directed not to her as an example. She is an example to him, right? Which is slightly different. And this is what I want you to see. That the authentic message of the gospel includes this aspect. That when you are out of an awareness of your need for God, when you realize the grace that God provides, guess what happens? You give. You serve. You love. You bow. That's what happens. You're like, because I get people all the time when they hear like me talking about grace and the gospel, they're like, yeah, but Mike, it's almost like easy believism for you. You're just saying like, if you just believe and God loves you and you can't do anything and like you don't have to do anything. And it's almost like, it's like you're enforcing people's bad behaviors. And I'm like, no. Think this through. When you realize your need and you connect to a God by faith out of gratitude, guess what? People in that situation, they do what this woman did. They bow. They serve. They give. They're extravagant. Does that make sense? The person in the story that's moral doesn't do any of those things. Which means the great temptation for churches is to fill up with people who are pretty good and then do nothing because we think we're deserving. But for those who get it, who know that their debt threshold is the same, we fill up places like this and we go, how? Pour out our hearts to God and go, how can we honor you? Because we are bankrupt. We are bankrupt without your grace. If you gave me a bill, there would be no way to pay for your grace and your mercy bestowed to me. Are you with me? Let's pray. Father, we thank you for a chance to gather in your name today, study your word. And I pray that as we take these few moments and just give thanks before you as a collective group, that you would just fill this place with gratitude, with love, that there would be an outpouring, maybe a surprise outpouring of thanksgiving before you today. As we come around your table and take your symbols of your body and blood shed for us, the means by which you've provided grace unto us, I pray that as we take it in, Father, that we be reminded that you dwelling in us is our hope. It is glory. Pray you take this moment and give thanks. Come and ready yourself to receive communion. If you're here today and you want to make a first-time commitment to Christ, there'll be folks up to my left and my right ready to pray with you, for you, over you as you mark this moment. When you're ready,